Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mentoring Diaries. I am Tuba. A few months ago, I had a mentoring conversation with someone who, on paper, was doing incredibly well. Senior role, respected by their team, delivering results consistently. But halfway through a conversation, they paused and said something that stayed with me. They said, I don't know when this happened, but I feel exhausted all the time, not just physically, emotionally. And what struck me most was this: nothing in their external life suggested a crisis, but internally, something had shifted. And I think many professionals are quietly experiencing this right now. Not necessarily a dramatic breakdown, until one day they realize they're operating on empty. And that's where mentoring often becomes incredibly powerful. Because mentoring in those moments isn't about quick advice or fixing a problem, it's about helping someone pause long enough to understand what's really happening beneath the surface. Sometimes that process leads to recovery, sometimes it leads to reinvention, and sometimes it leads to a completely new understanding of who they are and how they want to live and lead. That's exactly what today's conversation is about. Moving from burnout to breakthrough, not by pushing harder, but by learning how mentors can guide people through crisis, identity shift, and rebuilding resilience. And I'm really glad Sheena is joining me for this conversation. Sheena, it's wonderful to have you here. Tell us a little about yourself and your mentoring journey.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So I'm Sheena. I'm the CEO and founder of Stress Point Health. I am a twice exited founder, so I built and sold two companies, and this is my third company in mental health. I built Stress Point following my own lived experiences with PTSD and with other mental health concerns. And so I really wanted to do something in this space to make mental health care, to make resilience, performance training really accessible to a lot of people. And, along my journey as a female entrepreneur, it's very difficult, I think, to find supporters, to find mentors, to find people that can really guide you. When I built my first company, I had no idea what I was doing. And it wasn't in tech, so it was a different kind of business, but I built that over 10 years. But one of the key things I think that I had along the way were amazing mentors, male and female, people who believed in me, who supported me along the way, who gave me encouragement, but also constructive criticism, were able to shape my journey and the way that I was able to build those businesses. And so when it came to a time where I felt I had enough knowledge and I felt I'd reached a point in my career where I wanted to pass that on, that's when I decided to get into mentoring. And it started in the UK. I was predominantly working with women who were innovating in technology or building their own businesses as entrepreneurs. But I also did work with kids in schools around emotional regulation, around mental health. And then that sort of broadened things out for me. And so now I'm really a part of a few mentor programs where I can really hopefully share my experience and knowledge and build and nurture the next generation of talent.
That's quite an inspiring and impactful journey. I mean, like
Thank
how you
you.
realize what exactly you wanted to do at a particular period of time, and you've taken it through your mentoring journey. I'm sure a lot of us will be able to, relate with that and work on that on the same way. So, Sheena, one thing I notice often is how burnout gets framed as a personal weakness. So, from your perspective, what are we getting wrong about burnout?
It's a great question. For me, the primary thing to know about burnout is the end. It is the end of a process. When you're burnt out, that's your body shutting down, your brain shutting down, and it's very, very difficult to then re-establish your health and well-being from that point. And believe me, I know I completely burnt out from my corporate finance job. I had a graduate job when I left university, and after 2.5 years, I had complete burnout, a mental breakdown, and it took me a year to recover from that. And so my primary message is always that burnout is the end, and we have to be intervening earlier and recognizing the signs and reducing the stigma and shame around burnout and around mental health in general, but particularly in the workplace, much earlier on in this process. Because people who are experiencing burnout are not functioning, and they are not able to function effectively. And that costs everyone, the organization, the person, what they're trying to achieve, and that knock-on effect is quite wide.
I think that really resonates. I've seen many professionals, who feel guilty sometimes, even to admit that they are feeling burnt out. And I don't know, but burnout often feels happens, when people are someone who really care and they keep pushing themselves without enough recovery. So as you mentioned, that it's the end. So it's more
Yeah.
like, it sounds more like a rebirth that from here onwards, it's going to be a positive sign for you. We've seen a lot of resilience, in leadership spaces, but in reality, many professionals are operating in environments where recovery time is very limited, and expectation stays very high. So, what should we rethink resilience in high pressure environments?
So I think it's important to understand that how this all links together. Resilience is often related to endurance. And resilience is not actually about endurance. Resilience is about your elasticity, how quickly you can bounce back from stress and from stressful situations and high pressured environments. Now, if you take one end of the scale when you're burnt out, your ability to bounce is severely hampered. This you and means that your resilience is much lower. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're dealing with and watching out for your mental health and well-being, and you're taking the steps to preserve that, your resilience is going to be far greater. You'll be able to survive high pressure situations and perform actually in high pressure situations much better. And this is where I think in senior leadership environments and in high performance environments, burnout is almost considered a badge of honor because it is attached to resilience. That if I am, going 12 hours a day or 24 hours a day, or I'm not taking any breaks and I'm working 7 days a week and I'm hustling hard, that's resilient. Oh, I feel burnt out. We use the phrase really flippantly and we say, oh, I feel burnt out today. That's because we're associating it with resilience. But actually, the opposite is true. And so when we look at high pressurized environments, I think it's important to look back and understand the regulation that needs to happen within the mind and body in order to achieve the best kind of decision making and cognitive function, in order to survive and perform and do well and prevent burnout. Ultimately, that's our goal, performing in a high pressure environment without burning out. And I think that traditionally, a lot of high performing leaders have felt stress was their badge of honor, that, they use stress as a fuel. And there are healthy ways to do that. We can't avoid stress in our life altogether. And our body's stress response, when it is regulated, is actually really important to help us function. But what happens is when it becomes dysregulated and when stress is starting to have a negative impact, that's when it starts to hold us back and draw us back and that we perform. And so it's important to understand these processes. I think the most misconceived idea about this is that you have to avoid stress altogether, or that you have to get rid of stress. That's not how it is. What we want to do is we want to create an arc that allows us to function well. So when we have a stress response, we're able to regulate effectively so that it doesn't impact or have a cascade effect on our body, and we can return to that balance as quickly as possible. And when you do that, the whole way that your brain processes information becomes much more efficient as opposed to less efficient. And it means your brain is sharper, your behaviors are all reflective of a much more regulated response within your body.
I really appreciate that distinction. And sometimes resilience gets misunderstood simply as, pushing harder. But sustainable
Exactly.
resilience often means, knowing when to pause, reset, or rethink how we are approaching things. And I think mentoring actually plays a very big role in, helping people recognize that particular moment. So,
Exactly.
and burnout or crisis often leads people to a deeper question about themselves because they start, actually questioning themselves is what I feel. They start wondering, is this still the part I want, or who am I becoming as a person? You start questioning yourself. So, and that's where I think if you take it in a positive way, I feel that's where the reinvention sometimes begin. because you question what exactly you want to be and are you on the right path in your life. So, from your experience, what does true reinvention require that most people underestimate?
So I think when we talk about reinvention, I think it's important to analyze within yourself what that means to you. Because if it is reinvention out of necessity or out of crisis, then it's only ever going to be reactionary. And it's only ever going to be a symptom of what you're going through now and trying to get through that, as opposed to looking at your long-term goals and what you really want to achieve with your life and career over a longer period of time. So I think it's really important in to separate this out that first of all, we if there is burnout and there is chronic fatigue and stress, we need to deal with that crisis mode first. And that should not be anything about you and what you want to be and how you want to come out of the crisis. First, we need to get to a point of just balance. And I think this is a really, really key point because sometimes we feel like we just need to get through it and move on and kind of find our way through quickly to not feel this way anymore. And that's really dangerous. And I think that's really unhelpful when things are framed in that way. So I think the first element is how do I get out of the mode that I'm in now? And then once you're in that position where you've dealt with this sort of scenario, you can then start to think about, okay, what is it that went wrong? Because when you're in an emotionally dysregulated place, all you're thinking about is emotions. You're thinking about how you're feeling, whether you're angry, whether you're sad, whether you're stressed, tired, snappy, short-tempered. You're not able to process cognitive thinking, logic, reason, and good decision making. So the first step is let's get emotionally regulated. Let's sort of regulate our nervous system. Let's understand, let's get us to a place of balance. Then you can start to think, okay, what do I need to do differently to prevent that happening again? What steps do I need to put into place to preserve my mental health, my well-being, my resilience? How do I rebuild that resilience to a place where it becomes constructive instead of destructive? And then what is the path over these next 90, 180, 12, 90 days, 180 days, 1 year look like to then help me start to achieve my goals? And I think when you goal set in these groupings, it becomes much more manageable. I think where a lot of people feel it's insurmountable is when they just see so much before them that they don't know where to begin, they don't know how to start. And for me, the when I mentor and when I talk to people through this process, it is let's deal with it step by step, but one thing at a time, because they all have a knock-on effect. Well, the way we process information is emotional first and then cognitive. So if we haven't balanced our emotional responses, we're then not able to process our cognitive logic thinking responses well enough. And we're only making decisions either impulsively based on emotion or are making decisions that are not actually in the cold light of day really going to be a benefit to us. And, we all know the saying that when you're feeling angry or emotional or stressed, to sleep on it. That's actually the oldest and best form of emotional regulation you can do because it allows your body to just reset from that heightened state. And then when you wake up in the morning, you can see things more clearly, you can see things differently, and you can start to analyze what you want to do next.
That's quite an advice, and trust me, I love the kind of input that you've given on that. And I really believe that your emotional stability is very important for you to function and take the right decision, in life. And something else that I've noticed, Sheena, is that burnout, usually hides behind success. Like people who look strong and accomplished externally can still be emotionally exhausted underneath. So
Yes.
how should a mentor approach someone who's high performing on the outside but struggling internally?
That I think is probably one of the most important questions for mentors. And it starts with normalizing what they're seeing. Because I think if you're a mentor, you'll see the signs. There'll be chronic fatigue, there will be hyperactivity, hypervigilance. There will be signs that you can see someone is burning out underneath the high performance facade. And the important thing in those moments is A, remove the shame, that it is okay to connect with those feelings and to talk about or recognize those feelings. But more importantly, to slow the pace down. If as a mentor, you're recognizing these signs of, as I said, hypervigilance, chronic fatigue, hyperactivity that are not matching with the performance, the actual performance, because there's what you show to someone on the outside, but then there's actually what you're delivering and the decisions you're making and how you're performing on the other side. And then it's important to really slow that pace down. Not every mentor session, and I know a lot of mentors will feel this, needs to have an output. Sometimes the output is just creating a space for your mentee to be and to express what they might want to express or not express. Maybe sometimes mentoring sessions are just talking about other things, helping them to create a comfort zone. That's an equally important part of mentoring than just creating a structure and a to-do list and an output. And this is what we must achieve in this hour, and this is what you must achieve in the next week. Creating that slow space, that will be really important for high performers, and it will help to kind of bring down the intensity of what they're feeling because they will want to push the session in this high speed way. And it's down to the mentor to just bring it back to something that is a little bit more calm and so they can rebuild. And I always start every mentor session that I do with questions around well-being. It's always around what on a personal level, not on a work level or on a project level. It's what was good this week? What was bad this week? What went well for you personally? What held you back this week? And that opens the door to conversations around in self-reflection and self-analysis that actually will help the mentor then frame what that session should be. I think all too often mentees feel they need to be guiding the mentor session because mentors ask the question, how can I help you today? Which puts the onus on the mentee to have an agenda. And agendas are good and structure is good, and that is important for sure. But I think it's also important to spend 10, 15 minutes of your hour just framing things for that person so that they can self-reflect in a way that is not attached to performance or attached to outputs or outcomes or KPIs, which we're all, all surrounded by in our daily work life. And I think once you start to build this leadership loop of understanding emotions, understanding their impact on decision and on behavior, that also filters into culture because if you're mentoring someone that has a team or is part of a team, these things can spread like panic spreads. That sense of hypervigilance and hyperactivity can create a pace within a team that's not suitable for everyone. And that can lead to other people in the team feeling stressed. And as that stress compounds, it can lead to fractures in the team. It can lead to poor decision making within a team. It can lead to, bad decisions and bad behavior and friction and clashing of personalities that could be managed much earlier on in the process if we sort of take these moments to kind of really understand what the responsibility we have for ourselves and our performance.
I think sometimes the hardest part is, simply just creating the space where someone feels safe enough to say, "I'm not okay." I think that's the first step.
Exactly.
Create that space, and trust me, and that moment of honesty often becomes, the beginning of healing. And
Exactly. And I think a key point to that is that sometimes I think mentors feel the need to be always optimistic and always kind of positive about everything. And I found that the biggest breakthroughs I've had, both as someone who has mentors and in my and being a mentor, is those moments of vulnerability. Those moments when you actually say, you know what, I didn't have a great week and things did go wrong, and I'm not really sure what to do from here. Because the suppression of of those things, when you suppress negative emotions or you suppress negative events or you just don't work through in your own mind or with your mentor who's that's what they're there for, what happened, it just becomes a sort of hot coal burning inside that becomes harder and harder to put out. And I think when you have those moments of just, even if it's just expressing it without wanting a solution, and one of the things I implement is also Would you like a solution, or would you like me to just listen? Because for some people, the act of just expressing what went wrong is enough for them to get it off their chest and for them to move on. And they might find it frustrating that as a mentor, you're like, well, what did you think of this? And did you do that? And what about this? And what about that? Others are looking for that. Others are looking for that guidance. Others are looking for what they need to process and work through this, and questions they need the mentor can ask to help them process. And so I think it's also around, when you create that space, creating a space that is personal to your mentee, that works for them. And that comes from just asking. It can be as simple as that.
So let's talk about emotional regulation, especially at leadership levels. Pressure can be constant, like there's so much decision, expectation, uncertainty. What role does emotional regulation play in preventing burnout?
It is central to preventing burnout. And, this is what we do at Stress Point Health. We are all about emotional regulation because it is the cornerstone of our nervous system and our brain function. And it's been largely ignored in the medical community, certainly, and in corporate environments. But to take it a step back to explain what emotional regulation is, when we process information, we process it, first of all, we process safety. Am I physically safe? Is this a safe environment? So that's what we all know as fight or flight. And generally, in your daily life, you're going to be that the answer to that question is going to be yes, I am safe. The second way, and this the next way that your body processes and your brain processes information, is emotionally. So this is where the nervous system, the transmission from fight or flight, it travels up through the nervous system into the emotional regulation center of your brain. And now we start to think about, how do I feel? How do I feel about this situation? Am I okay? Am I happy? Am I neutral? Am I angry? Am I sad? And depending on what that emotional response is, whether it's regulated or dysregulated, will then determine the third response, which is the slowest response, if you like, your brain has, which is cognitive. So how you think, how you make a decision, how you behave. So if you have emotional dysregulation, i.e., you're having a disproportionately negative emotional response to some information that is coming in, you will not be able to process logic, thinking, and decisions effectively. And so when you experience stress, this is what happens. This whole system of information processing takes place. Normally, your body systems are able to self-regulate. When stress becomes increasing and it becomes chronic and it becomes sustained, then you lose the ability to regulate this sort of loop that you're experiencing. So this is when you start to feel tired. The first sign of, when you're getting into burnout and into and your body is shutting down, is chronic fatigue. So emotional dysregulation, chronic stress, this starts to lead to chronic fatigue, which is starting to then weigh down all your body systems, which leads to burnout. So if we can focus on emotional regulation, we have the surest way to prevent burnout, because you're preventing this whole process from embedding in your bodily systems. You're improving your decision-making function. You're improving your cognitive function. You're enabling your behaviors to reflect a more balanced view. And if you add a high pressure environment, you're essentially pressure cooking all of these things together. Emotional dysregulation is the first thing that throws everything off balance. And so this is why it's so important. And there are many ways that you can emotionally regulate. And with lower levels of stress, obviously there's breathing, meditation, yoga, exercise. All of these things are very good for emotional regulation. But when you're in a more, where you're experiencing more chronic levels of stress, or those things are not possible, for example, if you can't exercise for your health or whatever, then there are tools. Obviously, we've created a tool that helps, but there are ways, other ways in which you can get that help to start to regulate. And this is really the key. And I talk about it a lot because it is something that will unlock potential and will unlock a lot of performance for people in the workplace. And I think we're not doing enough to really shine a light on it.
That's quite insightful. In fact, I think that awareness is so important. When leaders learn to regulate their emotion, they just don't protect themselves. they also create stability, for the people around them. I mean, so I think that is very
Exactly.
important. And my next question is going to be about identity shift, something that's
Yeah.
related to identity, because that, the priority
Just
shift.
before we move to that question, I just want to touch on something you just said. Sorry, I think there was a delay. In terms of the people around you, and as a leader, um, it does affect everyone around you. It infiltrates negativity and these kinds of negative forces. You might not recognize them, but I guarantee that your team is feeling it too. That knock-on effect of how you're behaving, especially if you're emotionally dysregulated, whether that's being short with people or angry or um, commanding them or being demanding, that's all part of this process. And I think it was very important that you said that you have a responsibility as a leader to, in order to create better team dynamics, because happier teams, teams that are working well together, are ultimately going to be more productive and are going to help the businesses move forward in a much more efficient way.
Yeah, after all, leadership energy is contagious.
Exactly, 100%. It's very true.
So, coming back to my question, how can mentors support someone, to the identity shift, like the transition, without rushing the process?
So when I went through everything that I went through in terms of burnout and my mental health conditions, I there was a point in time where I realized that everything that I'd been through and everything that I had learned through that process had shaped me into a different person. Not better or worse, just different. And I think that there is a process that happens before you see real breakthrough, where you have to really help that person move on from this idea that they can go back. You can't go back. When you experience full burnout or when you experience mental health issues, you can't go back. But that's not a bad thing. In actual fact, I think that's the power. The power of taking everything that's happened to you and understanding it and learning from it creates something unique within you. And then you can start to have a different insight into how you behave, empathy for others, recognizing the signs with others. I always call everything that happened to me my superpower because it gave me insights into the mind, into the body, into how people interact, how I respond to people that I think have shaped my success. And I think in some ways have made me more successful because I can recognize some of these different elements that are within people and within me. And so I think it's important for mentors to remove any shame, any blame, anything that is stigmatizing to the person and help them unlock the positive things that can come out of their experiences. And that comes from self-reflection and analysis. But I think the mentor can really help them to acknowledge and analyze what's happened. And so I think definitely focusing on recovery, as I said before reinvention. But then it's okay. What do I now look like? What's important to me now? What kind of leader do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to inspire? How do I want to get my team performing better? These are the really exciting questions that come out of things like that. And I think mentors have the ability to, mentors are not therapists, and I think that's really important to make that distinction. But mentors are able, in the context of that person's career journey, ask those questions. This is not who do you want to be in life in general? This is who do you want to be at work? What do you want to achieve in your career now? How are you going to use the things that you've learned to achieve greater success potentially? And how can you bring that empathy and that and those lessons into and across to your team? And that's, I think, the mentor's really key role in this. That also mentors are not there to give the answers. And I think that sometimes mentors feel like they have to have all the answers and they have to, tell someone what to do and this is how I did it, so this is how you should do it. No, mentor's responsibility is to help that person unlock it for themselves, to give them the keys and help them find the key that finds the right door. And I think that's really where mentoring is really powerful. And that comes from asking questions, understanding that person, and helping them do the work to analyze where they are and who they want to be.
That's great. In fact, I think mentoring is all about creating the space and not giving any kind of advice,
Yeah.
and because identity transition needs space to unfold, and sometimes, mentoring is all about sitting with the uncertainty, not immediately solving it for someone or giving them advice for that. So another piece we should talk about is systems. Burnout is often treated as a personal problem, but many times it's influenced by workplace culture and expectations. So, to what extent do you see burnout as a system issue rather than a personal failure?
Honestly, it's 99% a system issue. To be blunt, because there is a system that has created this level of chronic fatigue, of this, this chronic stress, this performance metrics, this, kind of push, push, push mentality that, and I say this a lot, that you can fix someone's individual or you can help them recover from their individual issues, whether that's burnout or stress. But if you put them back into the same environment and that environment has not changed, they're going to go through that cycle all over again. And so workplace culture is incredibly important. And it's interesting, I'm based in Dubai, and in the UAE, it's a very different set of circumstances in the workplace, because your job is your ability to stay in the country is tied to your visa, and your visa is tied to your job. So we see often high rates of burnout because people are just staying in their job, even if it's, having a negative effect on them, or it's not the right environment, or the culture isn't very good, because otherwise they'll have to leave and they want to stay and they want to build the life that they're building in this country. So we're doing quite a bit of work here on workplace culture and understanding these levers and mechanics of how you build a better environment to support your employees. And it's really part and parcel of preventing burnout is, how do we foster a supporting working environment? That the UAE framework for happiness actually identifies emotional regulation as one of the key pillars of workplace well-being and of individual happiness. They label it as happiness, and I think that that's really unique. I've not seen any government put emotional regulation in the framework, but they do recognize that. And that starts from every layer of an organization, creating a culture that is not stigmatizing for if you want to ask help, that doesn't ask for help, that doesn't see mental health as a dirty word, that allows people to get the help they need through their employer or otherwise, that doesn't shame, creates these environments that allow people to grow and evolve and express how they want to achieve their career goals. All of this fits into workplace culture, and this is a real driving force into people's satisfaction, people's productivity, whether they're absentee, the rates of absenteeism and presenteeism, all these metrics that we know that we can measure in workplaces. It all links back to the workplace environment. And toxic work environments, they're all over the world, for sure. They are really detrimental, and people become disposable within them. And I think that that's a really sad place to be. And unfortunately, when I was investment banking, I had a very toxic working environment. And 20 years later, when I started Stress Point Health, I started to work with companies, and I was very saddened to see that some of those environments were still the same. And it was really shocking to me that in 20 years we'd not changed anything about some, particularly in financial services, how we've not changed attitudes and changed that culture. So it's really, really important to start. And it's what we said earlier, it's about looking inward. If we're asking people to self-reflect and look at how they're behaving and what their stresses are, and what the things that are contributing to their burnout or to their chronic stress, we also need to be asking organizations to self-reflect and to look at the systems and the culture that might be contributing to that.
I'm sure, Sheena, that perspective, on system can be incredibly relieving for people when they realize that it's not about them being not strong, but it's actually, the system. So, can you share an example where helping someone regulate
Yes.
led to a noticeable shift, in their performance or well-being?
Yeah, I mean, we've worked with a number of companies. We've worked with a number of individuals. I work with high performing individuals personally as well. And so, I have multiple examples of where we've helped them with emotional regulation, and it's really transformed their decision making. One particular example I can give you was how I helped a COO to regulate her CEO. And she was in a very high performing tech company. And she came to me and she said, I'm struggling with my CEO because he's very impulsive and he makes decisions that are very emotional. And she's like, and then it makes my job difficult because then I have to implement these things. So I gave her a framework and I said, what you need to do is need to help him to regulate his emotional response. And how you can do that is when he says, "Oh, I think we should do this," ask him the question, is that how you think or is that how you feel? Now, he'll never want to admit that he's acting emotionally or impulsively. So his response will always be, no, that's what I think we should do. And then you can build on that and say, okay, if that's what you think, can we work this through and can we game this out and can we just understand what, the processes are to deliver this? And it's a very simple framework when it comes to managing those sort of high pressure leadership environments. But also, I think we've done a lot of work with people who are feeling that stress and anxiety at work, who know that it's affecting their sleep, their performance, their ability to make decisions. And so, by managing and regulate the emotional responses, we see really steep, big leaps and bounds and a lot of progress as it relates to performance without chronic stress and preventing burnout. So we're able to sort of look at different risk factors, understand an organization's stress points, and then really work to help them deal with them. So it's really the work that we're doing and what we're really seeing in the corporate world is that emotional regulation is actually probably one of the easier entry points because you can actually give people a lot of tools for emotional regulation, and then you can then work on the larger scale projects, which are of course cultural change, workplace initiatives. But when you can combine that with the individual regulation tools, that's a really you're really able to unlock success.
So, for someone listening today who feels stuck in burnout, what's the first mindset shift they should consider?
The first thing is don't blame yourself and don't beat yourself up. This is a physiological response that you're having to chronic stresses in your life. So the most important thing is to take a break, is to not think about it too much. And that sounds like an obvious thing to say, but that's what perpetuates a cycle that you think, oh my God, I'm really burnt out. I'm really feeling this. I can't go to work today, or I know that I'm not performing, or I'm going to miss a deadline. And it creates this heightened tension within your body. So the first thing you need to do is to lower that response, that sort of heightened level of stress within you. And that only comes from taking a break and then looking at tools. So whether that's yoga, whether that's meditation, whether that's sound, whatever it is that works for you, help your body and brain to start to regulate. And that takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. So it's a recognition that you need to take a break and you need to take a step back. You need to do, if you're in a crisis state, then you need to really take a significant break and really put in use those tools and find the things that help you to sort of self-regulate. If you feel you're at the earlier stages, it's really important to include daily practice. So these are sort of make it habitual to get up from your desk and go for a walk, fresh air, exercise, start to incorporate things in your daily routine. If you need more help, as I said, there are other tools like ours, like other tools out there that you can use to really help you to emotionally regulate. And so, but if you're there, where you are on the spectrum will determine your ability to how and where you must do this. But really, if you're in crisis, the only way that you're going to get through it is to take a step back. Take a step back and really take some time for you. Take a holiday, digital detox. I mean, the amount of time we spend on screens and computers and phones, and it really does have a negative impact on our health. And so it's important to either put your phone away for an hour or two and go out amongst nature or be outside, or really try to manage how much screen time you have. Very difficult when you're in, high pressured environments and when you're running, really intense companies, but equally very important because someone who's burnt out, who can't function at all, is not going to be able to do anything.
I think burnout doesn't mean someone is incapable or broken. Sometimes it's simply a
Right.
signal that something in their life or work needs to change. It's all about those
Exactly.
small internal shifts sometimes. This has been such a wonderful conversation, Sheena.
Exactly.
Let's move into a quick
Thank
fireside
you.
round. Whatever comes
Sure.
to your mind first. One early sign of burnout leaders ignore.
Chronic fatigue masks just productivity.
One myth about resilience.
Resilience just means pushing through no matter how exhausted you are.
One habit that builds emotional stability.
Daily resets, incorporating things into your routine, movement, silence, digital detox every day.
One question mentors should ask someone in crisis.
What are you carrying that no one else is seeing?
One word that defines true breakthrough.
Emotional regulation. That's 2 words.
And blame it on the system. Thank you, Sheena, for bringing not just your experience but your honesty into this space. One thing mentoring continues to remind me in this burnout doesn't always mean something is ending. Sometimes it's the moment where people begin to redefine who they are and what truly matters. Mentors doesn't rescue people from crisis. They help people rediscover their strength, clarity, and direction. And that's where real breakthrough begins. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, take a moment with it. Change often starts quietly with a single insight. At IMC, we're committed to creating a better world through the power of mentoring, one conversation at a time. Until we meet again, take care of yourself and each other.